Well, hello and welcome to this episode of The Terry Cole Show. I am so excited that you are spending time with me today, and I'm super excited about our topic for today's show because it is one of my favorite ever topics, and it remains something that I'm evolving into learning so much more about. But anyway, what we're going to be talking about in this episode is emotional IQ, what it is, and how to raise your emotional IQ and why. Why should we care about this? What does it actually mean? So let's just start with a general definition of what emotional IQ is. It's basically the capacity to be aware of, control, and express your emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathically. All right, so you get it? It's you being aware and being like a master of your own emotions. And that's not necessarily, yes, it is control, but it's knowing yourself and being dialed into other people as well. And this is not the same as being an empath, and it's not the same as being overly vulnerable to others. This is a real skill, and you can actually build this skill. So the first time that the concept of emotional IQ was even out there in the world was only as recently as 1995, which sounds like a long time ago, but in the world of psychotherapy and wellness and empowerment, it's really not that long ago. So Daniel Goleman, he published a book in 1995, and he was an author and a psychologist, and it was basically introducing this concept of emotional intelligence. And it's basically saying how we use emotional intelligence, and when you understand your own emotions and when you are keyed into and dialed into other people's emotions, not overly dialed into, but attuned to is more the language that I would use, how you are so much more successful professionally and personally. And it became a big hit in 1995 of people being super interested in being able to do this. And there's actually a book that just came out, I think, last year called EQ Applied, and that was actually written by Justin Bariso is his name. And that's a really interesting book too, because it's like real world examples of emotional IQ, because it can be hard to actually grasp this concept. It can be a little bit heady. So I'm going to move into my top 11 sort of signs and strategies around emotional IQ. So the first one is awareness. When you have high emotional IQ, you're aware of yourself and you have social awareness, your awareness of others. And you have the ability to recognize emotions and their impact, both on you and on people out there in the world. So it's like an ability to self-reflect. You have an ability to ask questions like, what are my emotional strengths? Right? Just questions that if you don't have high emotional IQ, you might never think to even ask. What are my emotional weaknesses? Right? How does my current mood affect my thoughts and my decision-making abilities? It's basically having the ability to wonder and pursue the answers to what is going on under the surface that influences what other people say or do. As a psychotherapist, of course, I'm completely interested in endlessly pondering these questions because I find human beings fascinating, but I'm always connecting the dots and thinking about, well, I know this about this person and potentially they responded this way, or they might be sensitive to this because of their life experience or whatever. And these are also things that everything I'm giving you on this list are things that you can pursue on your own if you're interested in raising your EQ, your emotional IQ, basically. The second thing is that you respond and not react, which means that you have the ability to pause. Just taking a moment to stop and think before you speak or act, which we all know is easier said than done. But of course, you can do it. Now, how do I help people do this? Through having a dedicated meditation practice. That's how I do it myself, is through a dedicated meditation practice. Creating internal expansion. And so why do we want to not react? Because generally it's not our best self. We don't have to spend a lot of time apologizing, being sorry, taking things back, wishing we hadn't made a commitment to something permanently that we don't actually want to do. Those are all things that happen when we react. So breathing, taking a moment, knowing that you have the right to take a moment. Another thing that is an indication of high emotional intelligence is the ability to handle criticism. Now, I was going to say constructive criticism, but the real deal of having this emotional resiliency is that you can look at even criticism that isn't given to you in the perfect package, let's say, because constructive criticism is pretty easy to take for most people. Can you find the potential gems of wisdom in criticism that you just want to be defensive about, but instead you realize that there might be something in there for you? Like, can you keep your emotions in check and actually hear what the person is saying, even if they're not masterful at saying it, because perhaps there is something incredibly important in there for you. The fourth thing is being empathic. What does this mean? It means that you show empathy and that you understand other people's feelings, that you have space for them, right? This helps you make a real connection with other people. When we have the disease to please or we're too codependent, if someone expresses a sad or an angry emotion, we just want to fix it. We want to tell them they shouldn't feel that way because they're wonderful or whatever. That's not having high emotional IQ, right? That's being codependent. It's the ability to be empathic without labeling or judging or feeling like you have to fix or save, right? It doesn't mean you agree with everyone, but it's that you have a desire to understand what someone is experiencing. The fifth one on the list is that you are generous with praise for others. That it doesn't take anything away from you to give credit where credit is due. And it's joyful to do it because, listen, all of us, it's a part of the human condition that we want acknowledgement. We crave it. We need it. We want to feel appreciated. We want to feel like our efforts are appreciated. And it shows high emotional IQ if you have this ability to do this, to actually give this willingly and joyfully, right? And it might be something that you're just not used to doing, but you can learn to do it. The sixth thing is that you give helpful feedback. So it's different than being super critical, but it's taking the time, because giving people negative feedback in a curt or sort of a demeaning way, that's not helpful feedback. So learning to reframe, if you have a criticism of something, you can actually reframe it in a constructive way if you take a moment to think about it, which requires you to not be so attached to your judgments, so attached to your opinion, right, of what you think is right and wrong. It really requires thinking. Having emotional intelligence requires a lot of internal thinking. So how can you give this criticism that you have in a way that the person receiving it will find it helpful? It will actually add value to their life instead of basically cutting them down. All right, the next trait or the next strategy is being able to apologize, being able to own what you're sorry for, right? It takes strength and courage to be able to say that you're sorry. And it's such an important part of healthy relationships, not just emotional IQ. Being in a long-term relationship, you have to be able to say you're sorry and accept someone else's apology. But it takes a big person to do that. This demonstrates a level of humility with the ability to do this. And this is it's very attractive to other people because you're not threatening, you're not controlling people. You're able to own your mistakes, which creates an environment where other people feel like if they make mistakes, it's not going to be the end of the world, right? And also apologizing, it's not always when you make a mistake. Sometimes you can apologize simply because someone misinterpreted what you said, and it's okay to be sorry that what you said hurt them, whether you meant it to or not. Again, it doesn't take anything away from you to be able to apologize, and in fact, you gain something from it. But many of us were taught, and many of us were raised by parents who could never say they were sorry or own their own faults. I'm very grateful that at least my mother was very able to say that she was sorry. And even in big ways, like in life, once I grew up, I remember getting a card from her many years after my parents had split up and my mother had had an affair and whatever. And that she wrote, I remember I was living on West 66th Street, and I got this little card. And my mother was a big snail mailer, even back in the day when everyone was, but she was more than most. And so I got a card. I thought, oh, this is cute. And it just was a card, a very heartfelt. What she wrote was just, Dear Tara, what did she say? I'm really sorry. Some of the choices that I made, I know caused you great pain. I'm really sorry, period. I've asked God to forgive me. I'm working on forgiving myself, and I'm hoping one day that you will forgive me too. Wow, I think I'm going to cry right now. Anyway, and I'd already forgiven her, but there was something incredibly validating for me as a kid who went through those experiences to have this parent figure in my life be able to simply say, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I hope that you can forgive me. And it really, as much as I didn't think I needed it, sometimes you don't know that you need something until you actually get it. Okay, moving on to number 8. You do not trap yourself in resentment prison, right? You don't hold on to resentment, right? Because it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Isn't that like a famous, we don't know if it's Rumi, Buddha, somebody said it. All I know is I didn't make it up, so I'm not taking credit for it. But think about that. That's exactly what holding on to resentment is. A lot of times our mind will have this illusion that if we hold on to the resentment, then we won't get hurt again, or that we won't get tricked again, or whatever. But it's an illusion, because the reality is it's doing 0 to the other person, but it really is negatively impacting the amount of peace that you can create in your life. And when you can do this, you basically are taking away the power that someone else has over holding you hostage emotionally. Think about it this way. Holding on to resentment, if you think about the things that you're holding on to resentment about, hasn't that person already taken up this really valuable place in your mind, this valuable real estate? Haven't they been squatting there long enough? Don't you think it could be time to just give them the boot by releasing yourself from resentment prison? So that's an important aspect of having a higher emotional intelligence, because you get the damage that does to you. The 9th thing is that you keep your word. That you are someone who, if you say you're going to do something, you friggin' do it, right? It's very common nowadays. And my God, when I lived in LA, I was like, oh my God, people just talk and never do what they say they're going to do in LA. It was so weird. I really did have that experience going from being a New York talent agent back in the day before I was a therapist to, I went to LA. I was supposed to live there for like a year. I lived there for like 6 weeks and was like, no thanks. I mean, I love to visit there, don't get me wrong, but I couldn't live there because there were people who were like, we should do lunch. We like just saying things that they didn't mean at all, and then not keeping their word, which I can't stand. So what happens when you keep your word? You actually become someone that others look to as reliable, as trustworthy, because you are. And you also become that for yourself. So keeping your word is so much more about you than it is about other people. Like the benefit to you is way more than it is to them, right? They're going to go on with their life. When you become someone that you can trust, then the sky's the limit as to what you can create. And if you don't keep your word to others, you most likely don't keep your word to yourself either. All right, number 10, we're almost there, is that you are generous with helping others. Getting into the trenches with other people. I don't mean in a codependent way. I don't mean unhealthy helping. I don't mean having the disease to please. I don't mean any of that. I mean you positively impact others and their emotional state when you're willing to help them. And that really sets you apart from other people. In a world where everything can be quid pro quo, right? I do this and then I get this. You do this for me and I do this for you type of thing. Giving with generosity, to dealing with what people are going through or helping them in the way that you can. This really builds trust. And I really do believe it inspires others to basically do the same, to value that. If you become a leader and you're generous with your heart and with your time and self-protective, right? I'm not saying give it all away, but there's something super valuable in being someone that people feel like they can come to. Because also when you have high emotional intelligence, you're not taking on their problem the way you would if you were a codependent. You're just there to maybe give counsel or whatever it is that they're asking help with. And the last idea and thought is that you know how to basically protect yourself emotionally, energetically. Because if you have high emotional IQ, or EQ as they call it, you know that these skills, these being sensitive to other people, these knowing how other people are, can also be used for bad things. There's a dark side of this skill of having emotional intelligence. So it can definitely be used for bad things. So if you think about, I just recently did a love bombing. I did a whole episode on love bombing because it was something that was so, that is a perfect example of high EQ gone wrong, because they know how to dial into you. They know how to dial into what you want and how you feel. The difference between having high emotional intelligence and doing good with it, and doing something good in your own life with it, and doing something bad with it, is that if you have a high EQ, you're not using it to manipulate others. You're using it to understand others and understand yourself. If you have high emotional IQ, but you're using it as a manipulation tool, then we're not going to call it high emotional IQ. We're just going to call it you being manipulative and a psycho. And that's not exactly something that we are striving to do. So I'm curious to know what you think about. How did you do when you looked at these 11 traits, strategies, points, ideas, thoughts? How did you do? Do you have a high emotional IQ? Are there things on this list that you could actually increase your capabilities in? Of course there are. Are you willing to do that? Do you value this? So I'd love to know what you think about this episode. If it added value to your life, do me a favor, share it on all your social media platforms with all your people who you think have low emotional IQ. No, I'm kidding. Share it with anyone who you think it will help, because I so appreciate you watching, reading, listening, and sharing. You know that I do. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say about your emotional IQ. I hope you have an amazing week. And as always, take care of you.